Good morning and welcome everyone. Thank you for attending this year's year-end close for GP. There we go. Our presenters today will be myself, Ron Peterson, the manufacturing practice manager here. Also Sarah Britton, the senior ERP consultant. So our agenda today will take us through a couple hours. I'll begin with a little bit on upgrades. We'll then switch over to Sarah, who will cover AR, AP, fixed assets, general ledger. I'll then cover manufacturing, field service, purchase orders, sales order processing, inventory. Then we'll wrap up with Sarah, who will cover payroll, and we'll take questions at the end. We have sent the documents out already, but if you didn't receive them or you do have any questions, you can send us a note in the chat, or you could simply send me an email. We're also recording this, so we will make this recording available as soon as possible. All right, and with that, we can just jump right into it. Okay, so a little bit about upgrades. So we do, of course, recommend that at the year end, that for your version, that you get all of the latest service packs, hot fixes, and everything up into the system. So if we are not doing that for you, then here are some tips and tricks and some things to know for doing that. So the first thing is that all the updates are cumulative. So if you were to go out to customer source and see all of the updates out there, don't worry. All you need is the last one. That will include all of the previous updates. And just also keep in mind that the install has to happen on all the servers and the workstations that have Microsoft Dynamics GP installed on them, or you'll get version errors. You'll know right away. Okay, so before you begin, just a few things to keep in mind. So, of course, we want you to back up the Dynamics database and all of the company databases. You'll need to export all of the modified forms and reports. And you can get to the export utility through the Dynamics GP cascading menu, Dynamics GP tools, customize, customization, maintenance, and you'll see a button there for exporting the forms and reports. Once you do that and you've created the package of the reports and the forms, then go ahead and back up those modified forms and reports dictionaries. You just make a copy of them somewhere and maybe change the extension to .old or something. And then we always recommend, it's a good idea to do this in a test environment. You know, even though you are backing up the databases, it's still a good idea to have a test environment that you can bang around in. Okay, so when you begin, the user that is doing this needs to have domain admin rights or equivalent, and And there is also two components to this install. There's the application, so there's actually getting the updated GP product updated. But then when you update, once that's updated, then you launch it and update the databases, the Dynamics database and the company databases. And that's done in the utilities. So typically we do the SQL Server client first, and then roll it out to the other clients. Just easier that way. All right, so a couple other things to keep in mind, that the client that you upgrade first does have all of the ISVs. So, if you're using Notice or, any of the other ISVs out there, just make sure that the client that you're using has those on there, and you can verify that those are updated as well. Okay, should go smoothly, but if it does not, there are some things that you can do to figure out what went wrong. If the Microsoft Service Pack fails, you can go out to the Windows installer log. You can do a web search to find out where that is, and you can just search that for errors that have return value 3, and should be some errors there that will allow you to determine what went wrong. You can also try installing it with a command line, and those two, there's more information there in the knowledge bases that you can click on and get links. The PowerPoint that was sent does have the embedded link in it. All right, you can also go into create of the DEX SQL log for tracing errors, and the instructions for doing that is in a knowledge base there on the first link. So one thing to remember, don't panic. If any of the databases fail, it's not catastrophic. Don't restore them. Just forge ahead and try to figure out what the error was and solve those error problems. So you'll notice that they failed due to a red X, or you'll notice that they have failed because the list of companies that failed will have a red X next to them. So there are there's a lot of information out there that you can get to based on your version. And again, all you need to do is click on these links and it'll open up more information for the specific version. Okay, so once the companies have been updated, you need to go into utilities and then update the modified forms and reports. So you really only need to do that once. If everybody's using the same one, then that's great. It's upgraded. If people are using their own modified forms and reports, you can tell that through the set file. You can just copy those updated modified forms and reports dictionaries out to the user in question. And then the service pack can then be pushed out in a number of different ways. You can use the GP mass deployment or any of the other tools that are out there. Okay. So once it's done, it's always a good idea then to make a backup. All the work that you've done, to back that up, the Dynamics database and the company databases. And then make a backup of the upgraded dictionaries, forms and reports dictionaries as well. Okay, with that, we'll head over to Sarah for ARAP and all that other good stuff. Sarah?
All right. Good morning, everybody. So we will forge on here with Receivables Management. Receivables Management year-end should be done, well, if your calendar year and your fiscal year are the same, they should be done at the same time at the end of the calendar year and prior to posting any transactions in the next calendar year. If your calendar and your fiscal year are not the same, you want to do your calendar year-end close at the end of the calendar year and before you start entering any transactions or posting transactions into the next calendar year. If it's fiscal, wait until the end of your fiscal year and run that year-end closing at the end of your fiscal. So what does the year-end close process do and what does it affect? The calendar year-end close, it will clear the calendar year-to-date finance charges and it moves them to the last year. This information is held in the customer finance charge summary. The fiscal year-end close transfers all amounts other than the calendar year to the last year column in the customer summary view. So again, basically it's moving the information from a current year column in the tables to a last year column in the tables. So if, I do know that there are people that forget to do receivables management year-end close. If you don't do it, it's not the end of the world. You're just not going to be able to rely on the last year-to-date and year-to-date columns in your smart list or in some of the inquiry windows. So what steps should you take when closing receivables management? You want to post all your receivables transactions for the year. Take a backup. We're going to talk about backups a lot. If you're doing all of this year-end closing on the same date, you're only having to do one backup, but if you're doing all of this stuff separately, we do suggest making a backup as you go along. Close the year, and then the next step is to go into the fiscal period setup and actually close that fiscal period for the sales and receivables module. Next thing you want to do is close the tax year if you are using GP to record and track and calculate your sales tax. Sales and use tax, you want to close that tax year. And then after that is complete, make a post-year-end closing backup. Some of the key points to remember, restorable backups, make those as you go along. Those are recommended. You can see that attached Microsoft knowledge-based article for more information on that. Receivables management is not completely date sensitive, and what I mean by that is you can't say close as of 12/31/2019 and then expect it to only include 2019 transactions. If you've already posted in 2020 and you try to do that year-end close, that 2020 information is going to go to the last year column. It's really, like I said, it's not going to mess up your data or anything. It's just going to mess up those columns for reporting purposes that appear in some of the inquiry windows as well as some of the smart lists. So, like I said, as there are some date-sensitive features, the best option is to make sure that you're closing that on time. So complete all of your posting for the current year, do your close, and then you can start posting in the next calendar or fiscal year. So that's really it for receivables management. Payables management is going to be very similar to receivables in the fact that it is not date sensitive. So the year-end close and fiscal year-end close, if they are coinciding with each other, should be run at the end of the calendar and fiscal year and prior to posting transactions in the new year. So the year-end close, there's a vendor yearly summary window. So the calendar close will transfer the 1099 amounts from the year-to-date column to last year column. And in the amounts since last close view will also be updated. The fiscal close, that will transfer all other amounts from the year-to-date column to the last year column. And that's also in the amounts since last close view. So what steps should I take when closing payables management? You're going to want to post all payables transactions for the year. Print your historical age trial balance report. That's a good thing to have for your records. If you do need the year-end update. You should install that at some point here before you're actually printing the 1099s. You want to verify and edit any 1099 information that you have in there. So print your 1099 reports, make sure all the information is accurate. If it's not, you want to go ahead and update that 1099 information for those vendors. Then you want to print your 1099 statements. You want to make your pre-year-end backup, close the year, go into the fiscal period setup, close the payables module, and then make your post-year-end backup. Important points to remember, IRS filing date, and I did not update that date, but the date is January 31st, 2020 for the 1099 miscellaneous if you're reporting non-employee compensation in box 7. Just like receivables management, payables management is not fully date sensitive, so it's recommended that you process the year-end closing routines at the actual year-end and before you make any posting into 2020. The vendor should be marked as a 1099 vendor at the time that transactions are posted or paid for the 1099 information to auto-populate. So if you go in and you set up a vendor record and you mark that vendor as 1099 at the time that you set up the vendor, all the transactions will automatically be flagged as 1099 transactions. If you forgot to mark that vendor as a 1099 vendor and you've processed transactions against that vendor, you can go in and update using the 1099 details window. You can edit those 1099 amounts individually, or there is also a mass update as well that you can use to assign all of the transactions under a specific vendor as 1099 transactions. All right, on to the fixed assets year-end closed. So when should the year-end close be done for fixed assets? That should be processed after payables management is closed and before closing the general ledger. So you want to make sure you do things in order, and you will see that order highlighted in the year-end booklet that we provided to you guys. It does lay out the order of when these modules should be closed. So again, you want to make sure that you do it after payables and before general ledger. If you have multiple books in your fixed asset module, each book can be closed separately, but all of the books must be closed before you can do any processing in fixed assets for the new year. So if you have 3 different books, you can, process those year-end closings at different times, but they all have to be done before you can start doing any sort of processing for the new year. What does the year-end close process do? So in the Asset General information window, the year-to-date maintenance amount, that's cleared from the Expand Last Maintenance Date window. So there's a last maintenance date window. You can click on the expansion button. The year-to-date maintenance amount is cleared out of there. The quantity is copied to the Begin Quantity field in the same Expand Quantity window. So there's a quantity field in that general information card. If you hit the expansion button on that, it will show you the Begin Quantity, which gets updated during that year-end close process. In the Asset Book window, so this is where you can get your details for your book. The year-to-date depreciation amount is cleared. The cost basis is copied to the Begin Year Cost field. The life-to-date depreciation is copied to Begin Reserve field, and the salvage value is copied to Begin Salvage field. So again, it's just kind of moving a whole bunch of information from one column to another column or from one field to another field and clearing out the year-to-date. In the book setup window, the current fiscal year will be increased by 1. So every time you close a book, if you close them one at a time, after you close that book, the current fiscal year will be incremented by 1. Dynamics GP 2015 has a fixed assets year-end report. So this is a status report of all of the assets affected by the close. And when I say Dynamics GP 2015, it's that version and any version after 2015. So what steps should be taken to close the year in fixed assets? You want to perform the year-end close for payables management. That's important if you're doing the payables to fixed assets integration. You want to enter all of your fixed asset transactions for the year. That includes depreciating all assets through the end of the year. Next process is to do the GL posting process so that information goes over to the GL. If you have any required year-end reports, anything specific that's important, year-end depreciation reports, that type of thing, make sure that you're running that before you process the year-end. You want to go ahead and go into your calendar and quarter setup and make sure that it is set up correctly for the next year, so that when you close the current year-end and it switches over to the next fiscal year or the next calendar year for the assets, that calendar is set up correctly. Next is to obviously create a backup, and finally is to run the year-end close routine. General ledger year-end close. The year-end close for general ledger should be done after you've completed the year-end close process for all other modules. So you should do all of your year-end closing for every other module that you use before you do the general ledger. Other modules should be closed in the following order here: inventory, receivables, payables, and fixed assets. So the year-end close process, what that does is it moves all open year transactions from the GL 20,000 table to the GL 30,000 table. So the GL 20,000 table contains all of the calendar open year transactions. The GL 30,000 contains all of the closed year transactions. It creates a beginning balance brought forward journal entry. Those are created in the GL 20,000. If you have it marked during the year-end close process, it can remove all inactive GL accounts that don't have any sort of a balance or history associated with it. It will not remove any accounts, regardless of whether they're inactive or active, that have a balance or have transaction history associated with it. There's also an option beginning in GP 2013 R2 and beyond. It will clear out the amount in the unit accounts if it's marked. The balances for all balance sheet accounts are rolled forward to the new year. So the beginning balance in the new year for the balance sheet accounts will be the same as the ending balance from the prior year that you are closing. The P&L accounts are rolled into retained earnings. If you close to one retained earnings account, or with the amount from the P&L accounts in that division, if you close to divisional retained earnings. So the P&L accounts will have a zero balance at the beginning of the new year. The fiscal period tables are updated to mark the year closed as a historical year. It will, if you're using analytical accounting, automatically close analytical counting as well. And the year-end close report prints. That year-end close report, you cannot reprint it, so make sure that you're printing it at the time that you're doing the year-end close. So what steps should I take to close the year? You want to complete the closing procedures for all other modules. Make sure that you're posting your final adjusting entries. You want to do an account posting type review. And I'm going to, as soon as I'm done talking about the general ledger closing, before I go back to Ron here, I'll show you a few things in GP just to kind of show you guys where this stuff is located and how you can do an account posting type review. You want to perform your file maintenance. So any reconciliations or check links that are part of your annual process, make sure you're doing that at that time. You always want to double check your general ledger settings. You want to make sure that you have it marked to keep the history for your transactions If you go through a year-end closing and you don't have that maintain history box checked, all of your transactions will be wiped. I've seen it happen before. They didn't take a backup for whatever reason that was unchecked, and they lost all of their data from the prior year. So you definitely want to make sure that you're double checking that and making a backup. So make that backup, print your trial balance. That's just for your records. Print your final financial statements. You want to make sure that you go in and set up the new fiscal year and then go ahead and close that year. You're going to want to go ahead and close all fiscal periods for all the other modules as well. That is optional, but it's recommended. Print your summary trial balance and verify with your previous trial balance that you printed prior to the year-end closing to make sure that everything is looking the way it should in the new year. Do your adjustments to your budget numbers. And then again, it's saying as a suggestion, make another backup. Some important points to remember. This is, like I just said, extremely important, especially with the general ledger. Make sure you're doing a backup. Don't ignore or bypass any errors. You should pay attention if any errors do come up during that year-end closing. It is suggested, highly recommended, that you have all other users out of GP when you perform the year-end close. It also is suggested to perform the year-end close at the server. You want to make sure that you have enough free space on the server to allow for the GL 20,000 table to double in size. And then the year-end close routine sometimes does appear to hang at 50%, but it's still processing, so let it run. Don't do an end task and get out of there. You want to make sure that you are letting that run all the way through. All right, I'm going to pull up GP here and just show you a few things in these modules. First thing, I'll start here in the sales. So as I talked about, the sales year-end close, pretty simple. All you have to do is come in here under routines, hit the year-end close. You're going to want to make sure you select what you're closing. So if your calendar and your fiscal year are the same, you can click all. Otherwise, if you're just wanting to do the calendar, click the calendar. You can see the last date that you closed. This date will be updated with the user date of the user that's doing the close. So my date is 12/31/2019. When I hit process here, it is going to update that last closing date to 12/31/2019. And it will generate quite a few reports that you can take a look at. Whether or not you keep these, that is up to you. I'm just going to go ahead and close out of these reports. All right, in the purchasing module, again, under routines, you have the year-end close. So if I go in here, again, that last closing date is the system date of the last person when they closed the payables. Select all or fiscal or calendar, depending on what your setup is. And when I hit close year, again, it's going to pop up with a report. The date changes to 12/31/2019 because, again, that is the system date that I have set up when I'm running through these processes. Again, here's the report. Whether you keep this or not, that is up to you guys. It's not necessary. What I was talking about with the 1099s, in the cards, you have the option to go into 1099 details, and you can go in here and modify the information for the transactions or the information that would appear on the 1099 for that customer. So if you want to manually update just the total amounts, you can come in here and do that for the year. Otherwise, there are options in the utilities to update 1099 information. So in this scenario, if you have created a vendor, you did not set them up as 1099, and at the end of the year, you realize they should have been 1099, you can go in here and you can actually update that vendor. So you can change their tax type if they're marked as not a 1099 vendor to a miscellaneous box 7. And then you can select that vendor and insert it here. And what that will do is it will go in and update the vendor card. You'll obviously have to go in and update their tax or registration tax ID number separately, but it will go up and mark that vendor as a 1099 vendor, and then it will also update all of the transactions associated with that vendor as 1099 transactions so that your 1099 would be correct at the end of the year. Um, 1099 information can be printed from here. So this is where you're actually going to go in and select your 1099 type and print your 1099s from this screen. All right, after purchasing, we talked about fixed assets. Fixed assets, you have the year-end closing here. So if I click, down here, we're going to have the year-end asset. This is a test system, so the dates are kind of funky. It says I'm going to close 2028. If I want to close all of those books, I'm going to go ahead and hit all. And if I hit continue on this, it's going to go ahead and it's going to give me a warning that I didn't fully depreciate. That's fine. Create reports again. And then if I were to go into the actually set up the calendar for the book, I can now see that my next fiscal year has incremented to 2029 as I just closed 2028. Some of the information that we talked about that gets updated is on this general window when we're talking about last maintenance. So when we do the year-to-date or year-end, it will update the information that's in this window. So if you have any amounts in current maintenance, it'll move it to, if you have any amounts in year-to-date maintenance, it will move it to the life-to-date maintenance. Same thing with the quantities. It will update this begin quantity field. And on the books, it will update, I don't have the information in here, but it will update, there we go, the year-to-date depreciation will clear out, and the life-to-date depreciation, that'll be the year-to-date current, or the previous year-to-date will be moved into the life-to-date depreciation. Begin year cost, that gets updated, and the salvage value. All right, so financial, what we had talked about a little bit in there is making sure that you're doing a posting type review before you close the year end. You want to make sure that any accounts that you added through the year have the correct or indicated as a balance sheet account or profit and loss, because they're handled completely different during the year end close process. There is an option here, and what I've done is I've created 2 smart list favorites. One that's going to identify if there are any accounts that are not marked as balance sheet but should, and same thing with profit and loss. So these are the accounts based on the account number. What I've done is created a search where it says anything with the main segment between $4,000 and $9,999. Those should be profit and loss accounts, not balance sheet accounts. So because there's some accounts coming up here, what I want to do is go into the account maintenance and update that posting type before I do the year-end close. Another thing that I wanted to show you is in the setup for general ledger. This is what I was talking about when I'm talking about the maintain history. If you want to keep any historical transaction information or any history at all, you want to make sure that you have these 2 options checked here before you do your year-end close. And again, in my opinion, making a backup before the year-end financial close is probably the most important aspect of those backups. Between the payroll pieces and the general ledger pieces, you want to make sure you're doing a backup here. Fiscal accounts or periods, you can go in here to the fiscal periods, and this is where you're actually going to, for that year, mark these periods closed. So if I just hit close all, it'll go through and mark all of these periods closed so that no additional posting can be done to them. And then the utility here, actually routine. Go to the year-end closing. Make sure that your retained earnings account is correct. You really shouldn't need to modify this starting journal entry unless you're numbering your journal entries for the year. I mean, some people, I guess, start with 2018 and then have a journal entry 0001 for 2018. So if they were doing that, you'd want to do the 2019-0001. Here's where you can remove any unused segment numbers, or like we had talked, maintain the inactive accounts. If you want to get rid of or keep all of the inactive accounts, you want to make sure that you check this. If that's not checked, it will remove inactive accounts that do not have any history or balance associated with them. So when you're ready, you can hit the close the year. We're going to go ahead and hit continue. It says all my batches aren't closed. In your situation, if all your batches aren't closed, you should definitely investigate that. And then it'll give you a year-end closing report. One thing to keep in mind here is if you do have some entries that you need to come back and post at a specific or at a different date, you can reverse the year-end close. So I can open this year back up if I need to. So if I didn't notice that one of my accounts was set up as a balance sheet account when it should have been profit and loss, what we actually suggest doing is reversing the historical year, going in and changing that account from a profit and loss to a balance sheet, and then coming in here and closing the year again. That's going to give you the cleanest option for moving forward on that. All right, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to send it back over to Ron here. Let's get this slideshow back on. And go ahead, Ron.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so we're going to be talking about manufacturing, field service, sales orders, purchasing, and inventory. So manufacturing and field service first. So there isn't there's no predefined procedure to close manufacturing. And in fact, everything that I'm going to be talking about here really is simply in preparation for the inventory year-end closing process. So it's just making sure everything is all in line so that you have a good inventory close. So though there isn't a year-end close for manufacturing, the procedures and what we're going to be talking about are recommended to be done on a monthly basis as well as the year-end. So it's just like any other month-end close for year-end. So you would process any labor or inventory transactions and just make sure all of that is pushed through. It's also a good idea to roll up and revalue your inventory if you are standard cost. So if you're standard cost, it's probably a good idea to address the new standard costs for your items going forward. So just again, to reiterate, whether or not you're using the GP bill of materials, the Dynamics GP manufacturing, or Horizons manufacturing, the process really is the same, as with any month end, just process any labor or inventory transactions that you can. Okay. And again, and with field service, it's the same. Just process any contracts, service calls, returns, equipment transactions prior to the month end or the year end, so that the appropriate revenues and expenses are recognized. Okay, so manufacturing, field service, sales order processing. So again, there's no predefined or required process for closing sales orders. Again, it's just recommended to ensure that inventory closes correctly. So there are 3 things that you should do. One is to process and post all the transactions that you can. So make sure that all the sales orders, invoices, back orders are entered and then they're processed. And this is important to make sure that the historical amounts that are going to be created are accurate for the closing year. We'll then want to reconcile the sales module, the sales documents, and that will just verify that everything is in order. It'll verify that the extended prices are correct, that the remaining quantities are correct, that the sales detail entry is correct, lot numbers, serial numbers, and all the quantities on the quotes, orders, invoices, back orders are all correct. The last thing is the remove sales documents. And then this really only pertains to quotes, orders, and back orders. And what it does is it will remove any of the completed documents from the work table or the open table into history. A document is completed, it's considered completed if it does not contain a deposit and all the line items have a remaining quantity of 0. So there's many instances where those can hang out in the open table endlessly, but if you run that process, it's going to move all of those completed sales documents over into history. Okay. So again, nothing required for purchase order processing, but these steps here are recommended so that inventory processes quickly during close. All right. So again, similar to sales orders, process and post all of the transactions. So make sure all of the purchase orders are entered and processed, received, processed as appropriate. And again, this is to ensure that the historical amounts that are being created are accurate. You'll also want to go in to the purchasing module into the tools and reconcile the purchase orders, and that will it will verify and recalculate, if needed, the quantities, the canceled quantities, the subtotals, the remaining quantities. It will verify the statuses of the order are correct, the line item statuses are correct, and the discounts, the trade and the line discounts are correct. All right, again, similar to sales orders, you can remove the completed purchase orders. Again, it takes the documents that are remaining in the open table and moves them into history. And we also recommend printing additional reports. We would recommend the purchase order analysis and the received not invoiced report. And then you can reconcile this report to your accrued purchases, the liability. Okay. right, so inventory. All right, so when should the inventory close be done? So after you've done everything, of course, with sales orders, purchase orders, manufacturing and field service, but it should be closed at the end of your fiscal year before any new transactions that would affect inventory quantities are posted. All right, so what does inventory closing do? Well, it transfers all the summarized current year-end quantities, costs, all of that, all those amounts into history, into the summarized sales history for that item. It does also go out into each item's beginning quantity and recalculates that on hand for each site that that item exists in. It will also zero out the quantity sold field for reporting on quantity sold current year for each site, and also will give you the option to remove any items that you have marked as discontinued. We'll also remove sold receipts and then any unused lot attributes. And if you're not using the Dynamics GP manufacturing standard cost, it will update the item's standard cost. All right, so what are the steps for closing inventory? Well, just as a review, enter and post all the purchase orders and sales orders, inventory that's possible. Reconcile purchase orders and sales orders. Again, that's going to be a very good idea because reconciling inventory is going to base its algorithms on purchase orders and sales orders being correct. It's also a good idea, if possible, to do a complete physical inventory and post the adjustments. Have fresh inventory numbers going into the year. The reports that are recommended would be the stock status, purchase receipts, the turnover, transaction history, all of the serial number lists and the lot number list. When you're done with all of those, you can simply close the year. All right, so some things obvious that we keep hammering on you guys: make a restorable backup. As I've said before, reconcile SOP and POP before starting the close on inventory. And we also recommend that if you're not already using it, this is a great time to implement the HITB, the Historical Inventory Trial Balance Report, for most of you that are on versions later than GP10. Okay, and as I said before, if you're using manufacturing standard cost, this would be a great time to do a roll-up and revalue of your inventory. Okay, there are a list of some things that we've talked about that you can reference. Knowledge base articles. And with that, we'll wrap up with payroll.
All right, payroll year-end closing. When should that be done? You should make sure that you have completed all of your 2019 pay runs. Definitely make a backup, and you should do this before you process any pay runs in the new year. So what does the payroll year-end close process do? It will create the year-end wage file that is used to generate your W-2s, W-3s, 1099s, 1094, and 1095s, and the magnetic media for filing for the year being closed. With the release of Microsoft Dynamics GP 2016 R2, so if you are on 2016 R2 or a later version, users can now print W-2s on blank paper. So the option exists to print the form with the boxes on it, so you're not having to purchase the W-2 paper from an office supply store. Remember that support will end on April 14th, 2020 for GP 2015. So the year-end update is most likely the final release for this version of GP. You will, if you are on GP 2015, you will need to upgrade before the end of 2020 because you will not get a year-end update for next year if you're on GP 2015. If you have any questions on that, or if you want to plan your upgrade, you can contact us and we can get that process started. What steps should you take to close the year? You want to verify your version of GP. You must be on one of the following to install the year-end update: 2015, 2016, 2018. 2018 is now also referred to as GP18. They're kind of changing their versioning structure, so you'll see a little bit more on that as more information is released about it. I'm going to complete all of your 2019 pay runs. Make sure that you're doing your monthly and quarterly period end procedures for 2019 and that those are all complete. Obviously, create a pre-year-end backup. You want to install the year-end update. Now, that year-end update really can be done at any time, but it needs to be done before you create the year-end wage file. So I know some people have already installed that year-end update, and that's perfectly fine. That's not an issue. It can be installed at any time, even before you're done with your 2019 pay runs. Just make sure that you're doing it before you create the year-end wage file and do your year-end close. After you do the close, you'll want to make a post-year-end backup. So you want to keep your pre- and post-year-end backup in a safe place. You want to go in and take a look at the W-2 and the 1099-R statement information, and then you can do your edits. Edits your W-2s if there's anything that's not often or common. It's more common if you need to go in and update your 1095-Cs. That can be done manually after you've done the year-end wage file. If you make edits to your W-2 and your 1095-C, and then for some reason you have to go back in and basically recreate that year-end wage file, it will wipe out any edits that you've done to the W-2s or the 1095. You want to print out your W-2 validation report, print your W-2 forms and your transmittal form, as well as your 1095-Cs and your 1094-C transmittal form. If there are any edits to the 1099-R, you should make them at this point, and then run your 1099-R validation report, your forms, and the 1096 transmittal form. Next step is to create the W-2 electronic file. That's optional for some people. I think if you have over a certain amount of employees, it is required to file electronically. You can file by paper if you're under a certain number of employees, but the W-2 electronic file is also a pretty simple way of getting that filing complete. Next step would go into the fiscal period setup and close the payroll series if you want to at that time. Again, that's an optional step. And then finally, you want to install your 2020 payroll tax update before you are doing any pay runs for 2020. You want to make sure that those new tax tables are in there before you process payroll for the next year. Some key points to remember: there is an alternate checklist available if you do need to process 2020 pay runs before you're printing your 2019 W-2 and your 1099-R statements. So that alternate checklist is available in the OTT year-end booklet. You guys should have received that already. You can take a look at that if you need to access that alternate checklist. The year-end wage file, it's held in the UPR 10-100 table and the UPR 10-107 tables. The year-end wage report is available for printing at any time. You want to make sure you edit and print your W-2s, and then creating your W-2 electronic file, which is held in the tables indicated there. Make sure prior to processing pay runs in the new year that you are installing the payroll tax update. The steps to do that are located right there. And I'll show you here after we wrap up. I'll go into GP and show you a few things in there as well. Important due dates. Your W-2 statements, either filed electronically or on paper, are due to the Social Security Administration and to employees by January 31st. Your 1095-C statements, previously you had a little bit longer to get those to employees. This year, they're not cutting any slack, so the due date is January 31st, 2020. If you are filing your 1095-C statements on paper, you'll need to have the 1095-C statement and the 1094-C transmittal. When you're filing those on paper, you need to have them to the Social Security Administration by February 28th. If you are filing that electronically, the deadline is March 31st. So there are some knowledge-based resources out there on the year-end closing procedures. You can see here the modules listed as well as a knowledge-based article on completing the year-end closing procedure for those modules. You can click on those links to access those knowledge-based articles. For any additional questions about year-end processing, you can contact OTT or technical support line at 651-262-2626 or email us at support@ott-inc.com. There's also additional information out on the Microsoft Dynamics GP Customer Source website. All right, so that concludes the presentation. I'm going to go in here into GP and just show you a few things with the HR and payroll. This is the year-end closing process. So when you click on year-end closing, it's going to ask you what year you're going to create the year-end wage file for. So if I'm going to select 2019 and hit process, if I'm using the PTO, it's going to ask me to reset. This, I've already created it for the 2019, so it's going to ask me if I want to delete what I've already created. Again, if you had already made edits to your W-2s or your 1095s, at that point, if you hit the delete, it will delete those edits and recreate those files. It's going to go through that. Yours might take a little bit longer. You'll probably have more information in yours, but then you have the year-end wage report. I'm going to take a look at 2027 because this is a sample database, so that's where the data is. So I'm going to go ahead and print that year-end employee wage report. So that's what this kind of looks like. It's going to give you a summary of what's going to appear on that W-2. If you need to make any modifications to that W-2, you can come in here and pull up the employee and make any edits as necessary. You also can edit the 1095-C from this window as well. So you can go in here and update the offer of coverage, so on and so forth, for that 1095-C. Printing your W-2s. So as I said, in 2016 R2 and beyond, there is the option to print to plain paper. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select 2027, and I'm going to do my W-2 forms, and I'm going to do one wide forms with box. And when I print that, I'm going to see that it's going to print with the box information, so I can print it right onto plain paper. You did see here that there is employee self-service. So you can, if you are using the employee self-service, in that employee self-service, they can generate their W-2 from there as well. You can publish that W-2 out there, and they can actually access it their own. So you could exclude those employee self-service printed W-2s and just print the W-2s for the employees that have not accessed it through the self-service portal. You see that button up here, Publish to Employee Self-Service. So when you've done your edits and you're ready for them to access that, at that point you would also click on the Publish to Employee Self-Service. Tax update, that's done through the GP maintenance and U.S. payroll tax updates. Check for tax updates. Most of you are going to want to do the automatic. It's super simple. You click the next. That showed up on my other screen. Your authorization number is typically the main phone number that's on your account for PartnerSource. So you type in your authorization number, hit the login, and basically what it does is it goes out to their website and retrieves that tax update and installs it for you. Some people have reported errors when attempting to do the tax update from a workstation. If you do receive any errors at the time that you're doing this on the workstation, it's suggested to go out and try it on the server. I don't have an explanation of why. Sometimes it doesn't work from the workstation, but typically it always will work just fine from the server. You can go in and take a look at those taxes after your update. Come in here, you can see your last tax update. This will give you the last update of the tax rates, and then your last tax code. That may not be the same date, because there might not be any code changes. It might just be some filing changes in there, not necessarily code. All right, I think that's pretty much all that I wanted to show you. We can take this time remaining. We finished up a little early again this year. We can take this time remaining to answer any questions that anybody may have. You guys are on mute, so we can't hear you. But if you have any questions, you can certainly raise your hand, and we can answer those questions as they come in. Ron, are you seeing any questions?
I am not.
Yeah, for some reason it's not allowing me to see who has logged in, so I'm not able to look at any questions that are coming in at this point.
It looks like it's all clear.
All right, we'll hang out here for a couple more minutes in case somebody does have a question. You can either, like I said, raise your hand. There's an option to raise your hand or type your question in the chat. We'll just hang out here for a couple minutes, see if there's something that comes in. Otherwise, we can end the webinar a little early here.
Sarah, there were a couple of people that had their hand raised.
Okay.
I was sorting it and I accidentally clicked one of them and it disappeared before I noted who it was. So I have messaged the other person. So if you had your hand raised and I didn't message you, you could raise it again and I will send you a chat message.
Yeah, I don't know if there's, like I said, I can't see the attendee list, so I'm not sure if there's a way to unmute them so they can ask their question, or if they're just typing it in for you. The people that have raised their hand, Ron, were they able to ask a question?
Yes, they are able to. I haven't seen it yet. 1 second, Sarah.
Okay. You should just be able to unmute them as well so they could ask the question if we wanted to do it that way.
Yeah, let me do that. Okay. Helen, you are unmuted.
Helen, are you still there? Does not appear to be working.
Sarah messaged the folks that had their hand raised, but
Okay. Well, it seems like
Helen's,
we're not getting.
I have
Go ahead.
Helen just finished typing, so I'll just read what she had typed here.
Perfect.
If there are no W-2s or 1099 changes, or no electric EW2 file changes, can we wait to install updates until all 2019 payrolls are done?
Yes, you can always wait until all 2019 payrolls are done. You don't have to install that update until after 2019 payrolls are done. You can install it before you're done, but you also can wait. Either one is fine. Yeah, I mean, you could take a look. It's always recommended that payroll clients install that year-end update. But if you take a look at the release and you don't think that it's going to affect you, you could skip it. But I don't recommend that because you're going to have that installed before you do next year, and anyways. Anything else, Ron?
I'm just monitoring for the other folks that I messaged, and I'm not seeing anything else. So we could hang out.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, if there are any questions after the webinar, you guys can certainly reach out to us as well, either our support line or to Ron or myself directly. My email address is sburton@ott-inc.com. And I'm guessing yours is rpeterson@ott-inc.com. Is that correct, Ron?
That is correct.
Okay.
We had another question come in, and the question is, how do I find where the reports.dic is located? That is in the set file that's used to launch the product. Now, wherever GP is installed on your machine, in that directory is a file called dynamics.set. You may have to change the view options of Explorer to be able to see registered extensions. Otherwise, you're going to see a whole lot of files that say Dynamics, and you won't know which one is which. So you'll need to do that. But once you see the dynamics.set, thank you, Sarah, and you open it up in Notepad, just right-click on it, and open in Notepad, you'll see that the Dynamics dictionary is always listed first, and then the modified forms and reports for Dynamics are the third and the fourth one. So there will be a path, and it'll either be local to your local machine or somewhere out on the server. All right, I'll keep monitoring this for a minute. Okay, we'll wait a minute or so if there are any more questions. Looks like a couple people may have raised their hands. Let me just message them. You can just type right into the chat box if you have your hand raised. I should be able to see it. So we have another question. Where can I access the reports for the month-end resources?
I'm not entirely sure what that question is referring to. If it's a payroll question or something else, I am not entirely sure. I can go in here and take a look at some of the payroll reports. We've got the wage and hour reports. Otherwise, we've got the period end reports. That's under HR and payroll, under reports, and under period. You can indicate a month and print these reports by month. Again, I'm not entirely sure what the question is referring to, but if it is payroll, this is where you can get your monthly reports.
It looks like for the GL, it's referred to in the GL knowledge base for, the knowledge base 888003 for GL.
I don't have that. There we go. It's opening up here. I'm sorry, Ron. What was the question again?
It was, I'll summarize here, the reports for the month-end resources that are referred to in the 888003 procedures recap screen for GL.
We may have to follow up on that one. I'm not entirely sure what it's referring to here.
Okay. So we'll call you directly back after the webinar. Hang on a second here. While we're waiting, Sarah, maybe you can well, I don't know. I was going to have you search, but I'm not sure what for. Okay. So we did. There was another question that came in. We did email the PowerPoint and the guide that basically contains all of this information. It should have been sent to everybody that was registered. If you did not get that, just check the spam. Otherwise, I will send it back. I will send you another copy, Cynthia. Okay. Okay, well, we'll send that right off to you. All right. I guess unless there are, last chance, if there are any other questions, type them into the chat or raise your hand. I'll monitor that. All right, we can probably wrap it up then. Sarah?
Yep, I think we're good. Anybody has any additional questions, they can certainly reach out to us.
All right. Again, thank you everybody for attending. And if you do have any other questions, comments, concerns, shoot us an email. should be in the PowerPoint, or send an email to support. All right, thanks again. Have a good day.